Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for Off the Shelf, where Atlanta Sisters in Crime, Dawn Gepfer interviews an author about their path to writing and their latest book. We're glad all of you are here, and I'm going to turn it over to Dawn.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Lance. Yes, as Lance said, this is Off the Shelf, and this is a program Sisters in Crime Atlanta created. We're in our 5th year, so 4.5 years ago, and where we bring author on board live and have a conversation with them to learn a little bit more about them. And I'm so excited because today's author is actually a friend of mine. And I'm very proud of her. And I want to introduce her now. Her name is Emily Paige Skeen. She is an established novelist of low spice, wholesome romance, and Christian fiction. But her stories have always had a hint of mystery and a smidgen of suspense. She has decided to take that hint and smidgen and branch out into the mystery crime genre with her 4th published novel, Murder in Maple Grove, which is the first book in a new series. Hi, Paige.
Hello, good morning. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm super excited to chat all things murder mystery.
And that's quite a leap. And this is one of the things we'll talk about is taking that leap from romance and Christian fiction into the murder mystery genre. But before we go there, I always like to talk to our authors and ask them to tell us more about themselves than what we can learn about them on their book jacket bio. And so I want to go way back. I want to go back to like your childhood and your upbringing.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, I don't know if y'all are ready for this. So I am obviously Georgia born and raised, you can probably tell. But I've always loved to read. And I mean, growing up, I can remember in middle school having a book club with like 4 of my friends where we would just pass around, books we found at thrift stores or whatever. And so I've always been a big reader, and went to college for communication. Actually started as a music major, realized that was not for me because the only thing I could do with it was teach, and I did not want to teach. Well, I did not want to teach little kids. And so I transitioned into communication, public relations. And my plan was to be an event planner, maybe do weddings and things like that. But when I was fresh out of college, I got a job with a chiropractor as the marketing person. And so I kind of got into marketing, and which had been part of my degree. Communication, PR, it's all kind of intertwined together. But in college, I did also have to take like media writing classes and things like that. So I've always loved to write. I think when I want to say 13 is when I would say I wrote my first official story, and it was in this spiral bound notebook. And it was, I don't even remember what it was about, but probably about a boy, And so I've always loved to read and write. And actually, while I was in college, is when I started, well, I guess I was technically out of college, but I think I was dabbling with it in college, is when I first started working on Magnolia Lake, which was my debut novel. And it did not actually get published until I was 30. So it was quite a long time from starting work on it in college to actual publication. And so when I left college, I worked in marketing and things, but I was dabbling in writing and stuff. And then actually did attempt to self-publish Magnolia Lake before the 30 mark, but I didn't know what I was doing. I had no idea anything about the industry. Like, I was completely blind to what I should be doing, where I should be publishing. It wasn't like it is today, when it's pretty self-explanatory and a lot of people are self-publishing. Back then it wasn't like that. So I kind of stumbled my way through it, and then obviously nothing really happened. So I started submitting to publishers, and eventually led to getting a contract, which I'm sure we'll get to that later, but because that's not really childhood. But you know, so when I had my first baby, is I was already thinking about, okay, how can I make this writing thing, you know, a career? Because I wanted to be home with my babies. Still was kind of trying to submit to publishers and stuff. And then by the time I had my second baby, I was like, okay, I can't keep going back to work. You know, the first one was ready for preschool, and I was like, well, how are we going to do this? And so then I started freelance writing, but that's another story too. So I don't know, childhood, I guess I had a pretty regular childhood. Like I said, grew up reading and writing and, you know, being outside really.
So where did you grow up? You said you're a Georgia girl.
Mhm.
Where'd you grow
So
up?
I'm from Griffin originally, which is, if any of you know, it's small, but not as small as where I'm now, because now we're in Pike County, which is little bitty. But Griffin is about 45 minutes south of Atlanta, kind of near McDonough, Henry County, all of that.
All right. So I want to go back to something you mentioned because this is something I don't know about you, that you originally were going to major in music. So what was your musical background that took you in that direction, even though it was temporary?
Yeah. Well, just really singing in church, honestly. And then in school, I was in chorus and all through school, and was in chorus in high school, traveled with the chorus my senior year. And, you know, if anybody has ever attempted to do music in college, it's a lot different. When you go to music theory classes, it's a lot more difficult than I thought it would be too. Like I was like, oh, I know music theory. I can read notes. I can, you know, I can do all that, but there's a whole other level to it that I was not prepared for. So yeah, I'd always, you know, I don't have I can't play any instruments, although I did try to learn piano in college because you had to take a piano class. So I mean, I can dabble a little bit, but I was always just a vocalist. And
Mhm.
so it was fun though. I did enjoy it because I got to take voice lessons my first year of college, and that was probably my favorite part. And I loved my voice teacher, and you know, that was fun. But realistically, I mean, there's really no need to have a music degree unless you are going to teach music. And at the time, I did not want to do that. So I was like, well, we're gonna transition here to something else.
Well, it obviously was a good transition, and it led you down a path where you have had, aside from being a novelist, prior to that, you had a really good career. In and I don't want to speak too much to it. I'd rather you speak to it, where because I know that you were doing like as you mentioned, marketing and PR work before the novel came out. Yeah, so
Yeah. And then, you know, I think what really, the marketing is not my favorite thing to do, but I've always enjoyed the writing aspect of it, the copy aspect. And so when my youngest was born, I was like, okay, what can I do? How can I do this from home? How can I be with him more? And so I actually ended up quitting my full-time job, which by that point, I wasn't working in marketing anymore. I had left and gone to a different chiropractor. But I was still doing a little bit of their newsletter type of stuff, but I was more office manager position there. But so I transitioned into freelance writing, and it was a long road because when you start freelancing, it's you know, it's not easy to get into. And so for the first couple years, I was working for 2 cents a word or something crazy like that. But that being said, it led me to, I mean, I can look back on that freelance writing journey and led me to where I am now, which is I work for a marketing agency based in New York, but as their head of editorial. So I'm, you know, all of that experience that I had with the freelance writing led me into this. And so, you know, it was interesting, and it does still leave me time to work on my novels and things like that. So, you know, the goal is to eventually one day only write novels, that's the goal probably for everybody. But I do enjoy my work, my client work, most of the time. It's just like everything, it has its ups and downs, but I get to be, my schedule's flexible, so I can pick the kids up from school. I can, go to field days and all the things. And that was always really important to me too. Even when my husband and I first got married, like I knew right then I wanted to be with the kids. Like I wanted to be at home. I wanted to have the freedom I still wanted to work. I still wanted to write, obviously. And so being able to freelance has kind of helped me achieve both of those things.
And let's talk a little bit more about the freelancing, because you quit a steady income and said, I'm going to do this. And so how did you go about presenting yourself and establishing yourself as a freelancer in order to get the jobs that eventually, gave you the freedom you were looking for?
That's a good question. So I don't think the website is available anymore, but what I did was I started with what they call content mills, which is a good place to start, but it's not a good long-term solution, because what it is, it's a platform where businesses can post jobs, writing jobs. It's similar to like Upwork and Fiverr, but it was specifically just for writing. I don't think the platform that I used then even exists, but that's kind of how I got into it. And really, it was all just research, Googling, like, how do I do this? Kind of just stumbling my way through it. And then one of the chiropractors that I had worked with, actually, I ended up doing his blog for a little while. And then I did some networking, and I met one lady who introduced me to somebody else who had a business. And so I did his blog for a little while. So it was kind of a mixture of just reaching out to people I already knew and doing some networking, and then also looking into these websites, content platform type of websites, to see if I could get work there. And then I did that for a while, for a few years. And then I was looking on, actually found it on Angel List, which I think Angel List has been bought out by somebody, but Angel List was a website where like startups could find service providers and things like that. And you would connect through that website. And that's actually how I found the work that I do now as the head of editorial. And it's a funny story, actually, because when I applied for the job, I thought I was applying for the writing role, the freelance writing role, and I actually was applying for the editor role. So I ended up, he gave me the editor position, which is good, because that's, I've been able to stick with him for, I think it's going on 8 years now. I've been working with this agency. And so it's just kind of funny that I was trying to write, but actually ended up, in a little bit of a better role than I was expecting. So, really just a lot of research and reaching out to people I knew and things like that.
Putting yourself out there.
Yes, exactly.
And another thing about going into the editorial role, that actually taught you a new and different skill too. So one more thing that you can put on your resume, right? Or your I guess you don't need a resume.
Portfolio.
Your portfolio. Yeah.
And I actually did some book editing for my previous publisher, also on a freelance basis. So that was a lot of fun. That was probably, if I could just do book editing and write, that would be ideal for me. It was a lot of fun, but they only needed, actually, which we'll get into this, but the publisher I was with ended up getting bought out. So that's why that ended.
So I think now's a good transition to talk a little bit more about your first novel, Magnolia Lake. You started writing it when you were very young, and tell us about that. Was that just like every now and then you would think of something and jot it down, or were you really trying to write it?
That's a good question. When I first started it, it was very much an idea came to me and I jotted it down. And then I would, whenever I had free time, I would sit down to write. And at this point, there was no plotting. There was no, there was no method to the madness. It was just a story was in me and I was just writing it. And then I'm very much a discovery writer, even today. Like I try very hard to plot a little bit, but I would say I'm very much a pantser for the most part. I do, as I've written more books and as I've, grown and matured a little bit with that skill, is I will try to at least have a loose outline to figure out where the story's going to go. Sometimes I don't even know how it's going to end yet, but I will at least have, okay, this is the general idea. This is the genre I want to write in. This is kind of the theme and whatever. But when I wrote Magnolia Lake, there was none of that. There was just, I didn't think about, because again, I didn't know what I was doing. I just knew I loved to write. And I mean, this is going to sound kind of braggy, but I've always been just naturally able to write. Like grammar has always come kind of naturally for me. Things like that. So even before I got into editing, I would always, I was always correcting things. And it's I'm not good at math. Like, don't give me math, but if it's words, I can do it. So, which is kind of funny because my husband is very good at math. And, so he'll ask me something, he'll be sending an email for work, whatever. He's like, can you look this over? And then I'm like, yeah, sure. And then if he's trying to explain like budgeting or whatever, and I'm like, okay, wait, say that one more time. Like, let's back up. You got to break it down. So yeah, that's math is not my strong suit, but, so Magnolia Lake was very much just whenever I had time, I had the idea. And then whenever I had time, I would just sit down and write and see what happened. And then it was just a slow process of eventually getting it to the finish mark. And then when I self-published it, I had my sister, one of my sisters, edit it for me. She has a master's degree. She's very smart. So I had her edit it for me. And then I put it up on Story Origin, which some of y'all might be familiar with that. It's a self-publishing platform, which I don't really use anymore. But at the time, I don't know that you could directly publish to Amazon yourself at that point in time. And so you had to go through like a third party, if I'm remembering right, or if you could, I didn't know how to do it. So that's what I did. But then, of course, obviously, and I don't know if I'm jumping ahead or not, but
you're fine.
When I started, this was again, the putting yourself out there and the networking thing, because through Story Origin, this self-publishing app, I met my editor that was with the publisher that I was with. She had a book up on the platform as well. And so we kind of started chatting back and forth, and come to find out she was an acquisitions editor for who was my publisher at the time. And so I just basically was like, look, I would love to have this published. If you are interested, could you take a look at it? Probably, if most of us in this group are probably writers, right? So that's not that's not how it works usually. Like you have to get an agent, it's a lot. You don't normally just meet somebody, an editor at a publisher, and they say, sure, I'll look at it, But again, I didn't know that. I was brand new, so I was like, I'm just going to ask her if she'll look at it. And they were not open for submissions at the time. So I think I said, whenever you're open for submissions next, would you mind looking at this? Well, she looked at it right away. And it was, I don't remember, maybe a couple of months later, and she offered me a contract. And I will never forget, I was actually in the shower and my computer was out in the living room, and I had my email up because I think I was waiting on email. I'm sure I checked it, religiously, was probably refreshing my email screen. And actually my husband saw the email come through, ran into the bathroom and told me. And I just remember in the shower just sobbing. Like, I was so happy. I was so excited. It was such a dream come true. So it was a really cool moment. So even though, that publisher was later bought out by a bigger company, and then, not to speak badly about them because they're great, but we were sort of treated as, a side project, or we weren't given as much attention. And so even though I did not stay with them long term, I'm very grateful for that, because that whole process, because it was a year or so from the time I got the contract until the book was published. So in that time, we did 3 or 4 more rounds of editing. You go back and forth so many times. And so what I thought had been a clean book still needed so much work. And so so just learning the editing process, and I just learned so much more about the actual industry and what it took, and the things that actually happen and go on. And so I think I credit that as like really kicking off my writing career.
So one of our audience members, and by the way, I do forget to say this, and I apologize. This is an open forum for conversation, and we welcome the audience to ask questions. You can speak directly, or if you'd rather have us ask the question for you, you can put it in the chat. And Sharon is asking, what was the name of your first publisher and who acquired them? Which is a very writer question. Like,
Yes.
I get that. I totally understand why she's asking that question.
So the name of the first publisher was Prism, Prism Book Group. And they were great. They were an independent publisher owned by Joan Alley, which actually Joan Alley was, so she was the owner of the company, but she also was like the head editor and cover designer. And so, because it was a small company, and actually I have used Joan for all of my covers since then, except for this most recent one. But we'll get into that later. But she's great. I love her. She has edited for me since I've transitioned into indie publishing. She's edited for me. I've hired her for that and for cover design. Because I felt like she did such a good job with everything with Prism. And so Prism Book Group was the initial publisher, and then they were bought out by Pelican Book Group. So Pelican is also great. They're a Christian publisher too, but like I said, they were already sort of established. And they just, it's hard. I would not want to be a publisher in today's landscape, just because it's hard to market all the books, and they'll do a big push when you have a new book out, but then that's sort of it. You're sort of left, and that's true across the board for everybody. And so I might be jumping ahead a little bit here, but so I wrote Magnolia Lake, they offered the contract for that, and then I did 2 novellas with them as part of like a series that we did. So we did like a Valentine's Day thing, and then we did a Christmas theme. And so different authors would have novellas released that were all kind of the same theme or whatnot. And so I did a couple of those with them as well. And then what happened is I was with them for a few years, and then when we did the Christmas one, that one was my book that is now Saving Apple Blossom Ranch. And at the time it was a novella, obviously, because that was kind of what the deal was. And I wanted to have it in paperback, because to date, that was my favorite book I had ever written at that time. And so I wanted it in paperback. They wouldn't publish it in paperback because it was short. It was a novella. They had a word count limit minimum that they would do for paperback books. And so I was like, well, maybe I can just get the rights back, and then I'll self-publish this myself, and I can do the paperback or whatever. Because at that point I kind of knew a little bit more about the industry, and I was better prepared than when I first tried to do that with Magnolia Lake. And so what happened was they said, sure, you can have your rights back. Here's the rights back to your other 2 books too. So if you are not familiar with the traditional publishing world, what that means when they give you your rights back or revert your rights, that basically means you're no longer published with them. So I went from having 3 published books out and available, being an official published author, to having nothing all at once. And so I had already been toying with the idea of indie publishing, just because once you get into it, unless you're with a big 5 publisher and you have a big advance or signing bonus, you're not really seeing much benefit, other than they'll do the editing, they'll do the cover design. But when it comes to like royalties or whatnot, like I said, they'll push you really hard at the beginning, but then they just can't. They have too many authors, and budgeting is always an issue and stuff. They can't really do a lot of marketing for you. So what I was finding is every time I was seeing any kind of bump in sales, it was a result of my efforts. And I was like, well, why am I making 20 cents on the dollar for this when I could just do it myself? Which that was a whole new learning process, of course. So that's kind of where that went.
So what I'm hearing from you is, unfortunately, I think quite common in
Yes,
the
it
writing
is.
world. When we talk to these authors, a lot of them have stories along that line of their publisher getting bought out, or being dropped, and then
Yeah.
having to find someone new, or they're somebody retires, so it's unfortunately, it's not uncommon, but it sounds like you have navigated through that quite well, which, that's great. Amazing. So let's talk about Magnolia Lake, um,
Okay.
and which is not your latest novel. We are definitely going to get to that, but there's a lot of interesting things about Magnolia Lake. The first one is, you said you started writing it when you were young.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, how old? 13? Or
No. That was when I was 13. I just wrote a random story.
oh,
It was like the
right.
first, I was probably college age when I started
Okay.
Magnolia Lake. Yeah.
Okay. And so and you said you published at 30, so let's say that
Mhm.
was like a 5 to 8 year process, like maybe.
Let's see. Well, I graduated college at 22, I think.
Mhm.
Um, got married at 23. So I do remember being newly married and working on the book. So I can't remember exactly the year that I started, but I do remember being newly married in our little 1 bedroom apartment working on the book. And so that was
And
when I
working
started
full
very young.
time.
Yes, and working
Yeah.
full time. Yeah.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
But didn't have kids yet. So,
Right. Right. But
life
still.
was a lot less hectic. Um,
I
but
thought you were
yes,
gonna say simpler. Life was simpler
simpler.
then.
Yes. More
Yeah.
time freedom, we'll say that. So yeah, when it's funny because Magnolia Lake is a young adult novel.
Hmm.
And that's it. I think it very much reflects where I was kind of, I don't want to say mentally, emotionally, like as in I thought I was a teenager, but just that life stage I had just kind of come from,
Right.
if that makes sense.
Hmm.
Which now and I don't know, this might be true for all writers. I'd be interested if anybody here has the same experience, but now I tend to like to write more late
Hmm.
20s, early
Hmm.
30s main characters. And so I don't know if it's just because as I get older, my characters get older. I don't know, but it's funny because it was very much, just coming out of that life stage. And I guess as obviously as you get older, you don't remember what it was like as much to be a teenager. And I was still young enough back then that I could kind of remember what it was like to be a teenager. But it's funny because that is still probably one of, I would say, one of my best-selling books, maybe. And it's funny because a lot of older women read it and love it, and I was not expecting that. I was like, oh wow. And so I have people who are like friends of mine and stuff, or parents of my friends that will say, oh, Magnolia Lake is my favorite. And it's funny because it's a young adult novel, but yeah, it's definitely, I think, not my favorite book that I've written, but it has a special place in my heart because, like I said, I think that is what kicked everything off. And people do like it, and that's always a thing that you worry about when you write a book. Is anybody gonna like this, or are they gonna think it's silly? Especially when it's young adult.
Well, and that's why I started that question with when you wrote it, or when you started writing it, because that's what I was wondering. How did that story develop over the course of the years until it was actually published? But I've read it, and I know that you stayed in that young adult, the high school angst, love
Yeah.
story. And you didn't, I was curious if, because you had been kind of like thinking about it and playing with it, if by the time you wrote it, like was Cora actually 28 instead of, 18, so
Yeah.
that was where I was trying to go with the question, but you answered it in your response, which was great. So one of the things about Magnolia Lake, when you first wrote it, you ended up getting it published by a Christian publisher. Was that the intent all along, or were you just wanting to publish it?
That's a good question. I think it was a little bit of both. From like for me, writing is very much a calling, and I consider it my ministry. And so it's been that from the beginning. I knew from the beginning that I was going to write Christian, or if not specifically Christian, at least, wholesome fiction that I would one day feel okay about my teenagers reading, which is really cool because my daughter is 14 and she has read Magnolia Lake and loved it. I think she's read maybe Love in Dogwood Bay too, which is a novella, but she has not read Saving Apple Blossom Ranch yet because I'm making her go through the Twilight series. But anyway, so it's really fun that she can now share in that. My 10-year-old son has no interest, but that's to be expected. But yeah, so I think from the beginning, my goal was to use writing as a way to share Jesus with the world, whether that was through a Christian publisher or just through a traditional publisher. And I just, honestly, I think it was a God thing, because I just happened to stumble across this publisher, this editor for the publishing house, that her name is Jackie Hopper. And I didn't know at the time that she worked for a publisher at all. So it kind of was like, wow, this is crazy. So yes and no, I guess, to answer your question. It worked out great that it ended up being a Christian publisher. I don't know that I even really was aware that there were a lot of Christian publishers for fiction at the time. I mean, obviously I had read Francine Rivers and stuff, but I didn't know that there were smaller publishing houses that, would consider themselves Christian. So it was just, again, it was interesting that she's the person I ended up hooking up with to get this published, for this to happen.
Yes. And so I want to read something about Magnolia Lake. So it was published the note that I have is that it was April 2020. Is that right? Or was it before then?
It was before then. Magnolia
Okay.
Lake came out in 2016, I think it was.
Okay.
I think that's when it was with Prism Book Group. I think it was 2016, I'm pretty sure.
All right. So 2016, that makes sense because you came with me to a Sisters in Crime meeting and as my guest, and you had only published Magnolia Lake at that time, and that was definitely before 2020 because we were all home in 2020. So I had a feeling that that date was wrong. And I remember, Paige, I've been waiting for this conversation, even though we hadn't started Off the Shelf yet. You told me in the car on the drive there, you're like, I'm going to write a mystery. And I was like, oh, I can't wait to read it. Okay, so here we finally are. But so here's what is available on the internet regarding Magnolia Lake. It is identified as clean high school romance, second chance love, gripping drama, sweet elements of faith, and a heartwarming ending. And that just sounds great, doesn't it? It's like, that's so sweet. When I'm in the mood for something lovely and calm and sweet, I'm going to pick up this book. And then you read a little bit more. And let me read the rest. This part, not the rest. Okay. While Cora navigates the turbulent waters of young love, there's someone who doesn't want to see her live happily ever after, and he'll go to unimaginable lengths to get his way. In the blink of an eye, Cora's plucked from her ordinary world and thrown into a horrific nightmare. She soon discovers there's more to life than high school romances, parties, and prom, like surviving. And when I read Magnolia Lake, my friend had just published a book. I couldn't wait. I got it. I think I drove out, you were doing an appearance somewhere, and I drove out to Williamson and to see,
Yeah,
yeah,
I
and
forgot
get
about
it and have
that.
you autograph it and everything for me. And so again, I'm, oh, clean high school romance, second chance love, la la la. And then you get to this part in the novel, and it's really startling. And it's not going to throw anybody off their wheels. That it's not like that at all. But in a lot of ways, it was unexpected. And one of the questions I had for you was, because you were with a Christian publisher, did that impact the way you went about writing this dramatic part of the book? Because it is a horrific nightmare, you guys. So did you have to go, like, did they say to you, Paige, you cannot get graphic here? How was that?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because yes, I and it wasn't graphic really, I would even say. I tend to not actually write anything that's, even now as an indie publisher, I don't write anything that's like gory or, that's displaying the violence like right there in your face. Because that's not my goal, which we'll get into that in a little bit too. But yes, there were some things that I had to kind of tone down, which was interesting because, again, to me, I didn't think that they were not graphic, they weren't gory. It was I think it was alluded, there was, how can I say this? Something was alluded to, I guess, that they didn't
Mhm.
want in the book at all. And so I had to take that part out completely, which wasn't a full like scene or anything. It was just kind of changing the wording of some things. And so I did have to, there were some things I had to kind of tone down a little bit. And at the time I was kind of annoyed, honestly, with that. I was like, really? But what I think it did for me that was good in a learning way is that they know their audience, and they knew that certain things would turn their audience off, and I might get bad reviews, and so even though it was sort of frustrating to not kind of have that creative freedom, it was also eye-opening for me, and it helped me to know, like, okay, I think this was maybe even the first time that I had thought about specific audiences per se, and like audience expectations, reader expectations. And so for me, that helped me it opened up the world of like, okay, when I go to write a novel, I
Sorry.
need, no, you're fine. Okay, okay. It opened up the world of like, when I go to write a novel, I do need to be considering who's going to read it and what their expectations are. And so I think it was more of that sort of thing, because again, there was nothing wrong with it really. And it wasn't gory and it wasn't graphic. It wasn't really violent, but it was just more about meeting reader expectations.
Sorry, my dog decided to bark. I don't know if y'all heard him or not, but it was
didn't.
startling to me. I was like, oh my God. So I apologize. Okay, so it you mentioned that it was kind of annoying. At any point, did you think to yourself, okay, if they're not going to let me write this and tell the story that I feel like needs to be told, should I just come up with something else dramatic that meets their criteria better and isn't as stressful to try to allude to instead of being able to describe?
Yeah. So no, because I didn't think of like, oh, I'm going to scrap this part or whatever, simply because it was an easy enough tweak to where I was able to still leave in the parts that it was kind of like open for imagination, if that makes sense, like open for interpretation. So I could have it, I could have something there that the reader could think, oh, something else may have happened, but it wasn't like this definitely happened, if that makes sense.
Yes.
And again, I was so excited at the time to be
Right.
with a publisher that I was like, I'll do whatever you want me to do.
I know.
After years of, I think the reason you have 2020 might be because that might have been the year that I self-published
Right.
the
I was
second
thinking
version of
those.
Magnolia
Yeah.
Lake.
Yeah.
So the
Yeah.
initial version came out,
Mhm.
I believe it was 2016, 2015 or 16, something like that. But after so many years of having written, having this novel that I worked on for years and years, and then submitting to publisher after publisher, like I was like, I will do what you want within reason. But, I was very happy to comply after that initial annoyance. So can I answer this question that's about from Carlene? Any regrets about your decision to self-publish?
Go ahead. That didn't show up on my screen. So I'm glad you got it. Yes, please.
Yeah, I have no regrets. I mean, my ultimate goal is to be a hybrid author, which basically most of you know, but it just means that I want certain things published with a traditional publisher, and then I want to be able to have my other certain things that are self-published. And the only downside I would say to self-publishing is that it is expensive, because you do have to pay for editing, you have to pay for cover design, if you're going to produce a quality book. And so, especially at this point in my career, that's important. It's because it's no longer just, oh, my first novel, I can't use that as an excuse of it not being, professional level. And so I think that's the only downside, is just not having a team behind you to throw, bounce ideas off of, and to help with the cover and the editing and all that. So having to pay for that. But I do really love the flexibility that it gives me, and the timeline. I can work on my timeline. Whereas when you're with a traditional publisher, you get the contract, it could be 2 more years before the book actually comes out. And when it's me, it's just like, okay, how quickly can I get this done? So yeah, that would be my answer to that question.
And I think too, you actually have the benefit of having that first experience and knowing, number one, what to do that other people did. Like, like, hey, I need to get someone to do this and someone to do that for me. And where other people that maybe start out writing and try to self-publish, they may, really, really stumble through it. Where at least you had some background of the traditional publishing route to guide you.
Yeah, and that's for sure that's one of the biggest things that I took away from being with that publisher. It's just like you said, it was a world of difference from when I very first attempted to self-publish and didn't have a clue what I was doing, to then being with the publisher, knowing, okay, these are the steps. This is how many rounds of edits a book actually goes through, which is way more than you would think. And this is what else needs to happen. This is, the formatting has to happen, all these things. And then also I met and connected with a lot of other authors that I still, like, we're still friends on Facebook, and we will still encourage each other and, share each other's posts about their books and stuff. And so that was also something that I'm grateful for, that I took away, is just having that network of other authors.
Yeah, the community. So let's fast forward to, I think it was last fall, that you published Murder in Maple Grove. And so we're going from, and even though you've already had, the hint of mystery and the smidgen of suspense, you're just like saying, well, that's no longer going to be just a hint and a smidgen. It's going to be the focus. So tell us about that, about number one, making that decision, even though I know you always had that desire, but actually saying, I'm going to, a leap of faith. I'm going to take this leap of faith, and I'm going to publish something different as Emily Paige Skeen.
Yeah. So it's interesting that you brought that up about, because I remember we had this conversation about Magnolia Lake. It wasn't quite enough of a crime or mystery or suspense novel to be considered, for something like this. And really and truly, I've always, even Saving Apple Blossom Ranch, which was my second full length, which actually, little sidebar here, that one was the one that I wanted the rights back to from my publisher. You have to, if you're not familiar with that, you have to make significant changes when you republish something, which usually is just the cover, and then you can just tweak a few things here and there and you're fine. But for this one, for Saving Apple Blossom Ranch, I actually took the chance and doubled the story. So I actually turned it into a full-length novel. And so that's another thing that I'm grateful for. Like it took me probably a year or two of wallowing in self-pity after I lost my publisher, and just like, what in the world, I didn't want this. Like, I only wanted part of this. I didn't want this completely. And so it was a lot of wrestling back and forth, like maybe I shouldn't even be doing this or whatever. But I did take that time, and I got a new cover actually from Joan, who was the owner of the original publisher. I got her to do a cover for Magnolia Lake. So we got a new cover. I made some edits, and actually I think the book is much, much stronger now than to see the way the book went from the original book to where it is now is insane. But back to kind of the Murder in Maple Grove. So even Saving Apple Blossom Ranch, though, has a little bit of, kind of a mystery, I guess you could say, just a smidgen again. So it's almost like I always have just written that into it unintentionally. And the same is true for romance. So even though Murder in Maple Grove is what I would consider mystery and suspense, there's also a romance, because I've discovered I cannot write without romance. Like Saving Apple Blossom Ranch originally was supposed to be women's fiction, and it turned into a romance. I can't help it. And so the sort of the same thing with the mystery and the suspense element. There's always been something. There's always been a little bit of that. But I have wanted to write, like you said, which I don't even remember that. So that's funny that you mentioned that. But it makes sense. But I've always wanted to write a full-on, either a thriller or a mystery or something, a crime novel. And probably because I've always been interested in that. I mean, as a kid, I watched Dateline with my parents, growing up. And actually, it's funny. My daughter and I make her listen to the Dateline podcast with me sometimes when we're in the car. And so I've always been into, and I've always liked horror movies, which I don't write anything horror. That's too much for me to write. But I've always enjoyed watching horror films and thrillers and mysteries and Criminal Minds. Like, I love the psychological thrillers. And so I think for me, it's always been just a little bit of intimidation, and like, I could never write a mystery or a suspense, like a true suspense novel, because it takes a lot of planning and plotting and things that I don't normally do, right? That I had not done in the past. And, to make a good mystery, you have to have all of these threads and stuff. And so I was just always a little bit intimidated to do it. And then I actually started reading some of the Harlequin love-inspired suspense books. And I was like, okay, I could probably, because they're a little bit more, they're on the sweeter side. There's not, there's no graphic stuff. There's, again, no gore, but you get that thrill and that suspense. And so I was like, I could probably write something like that. And some people might also call it cozy mystery. I don't think I wouldn't qualify mine as cozy mystery, just because when I think of cozy mystery, I think it's also kind of got some humor to it, and I'm not great with the humor. So when it comes to writing, I would love to be able to write humor, but don't really do that. So I wouldn't really classify it as cozy mystery because of that, but it's sort of that same kind of feel. Like, you get the suspense element, you get the mystery to solve, and you get a little bit of tension. And, I do, even at one point, this is kind of funny, but at one point when I was writing Murder in Maple Grove, I remember I was sitting at, I think it was our kitchen, like, bar peninsula thing, on a bar stool, like writing right there. And there was the windows behind me. And I remember whatever scene I was writing, I was like, I had to stop, and I was like looking out the window, and I'm like, okay, I gotta go to bed. It's dark outside. I'm freaking myself out here. So
You spooked yourself.
I did. I spooked myself. So that's always a good indicator, though. Like, if I can spook myself, then maybe this will actually be a decent scene.
And you've decided this is going to be the first in a series.
Yes.
Do you know how many in the series you think you'll have?
I don't know. I'm thinking it's probably going to be a smaller series, so probably 3. I've already started the second one. Should be farther along than I am, but I have. So it's not going to be sequential series. It's going to be more based on like the setting. So the character, you'll see one of the side characters from the first novel, she is having her own novel, her own story, in the second book. And then the third book will be a different character will have their story. And so it will build off of the previous books, but it's not going to be, if you haven't read this one, you can't read this one. So they'll stand alone, but they will be connected. So I'm excited about that.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea too. So real quick, tell us about Murder in Maple Grove so that we go out and buy it. But don't tell us the spoilers.
ending?
No spoilers.
Okay. Well, it's funny because I did not actually know who the villain was going to be until probably 3/4 of the way through the book. Like I knew what was happening, but I didn't know who was going to be responsible. I guess I had a couple of different characters in mind that I was like, it could be this person or it could be this person. But so in Murder in Maple Grove, you have Annabelle is the main character, and she at the beginning of the novel is married. Her husband ends up disappearing, basically, which that's on the back cover, so that's not a spoiler. But he goes missing. So the book is basically, and they were in the middle of actually getting divorced. They were separated. He had an affair a couple of times. So they were separating. She has a 5-year-old daughter. And because that was something else that I had been wanting to write was a story about a mom. Like that was, to me, that was important. I wanted to write something where the main character has a child and bring that element into it. And, she's dealing with motherhood on top of all of these other things that are happening in her life. And so Jackson is the husband's name. He goes missing. Basically, the book is her journey of trying to figure out the first part of the book, what happened to him. And then I'm pretty sure this is on the back cover. She finds him dead. So now it has turned from, okay, where's my
from missing
estranged husband to who killed my husband, and so it turns into that. And then she ends up on the run. She ends up being stalked and things happen that are crazy. And so it turns into basically her running for her life until finally at the end, she's like, okay, I've got to face this head on. I'm not going to keep running. I have a child, like we have to be able to live a normal life. And so that's kind of, it just goes through her journey of that. And then of course she's got her little daughter there with her the whole time. And so there's that element of keeping the girl safe and protected and stuff too. And of course there's some romance as well.
So what you have talked about, like being 3/4 of the way through and still not right, knowing like who's doing this. I hear that often. And so I think you're a pantser even in your mysteries.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and which again, I hear that a lot. And I'm like you, I'm intimidated by trying to write it because of the threads that you have to weave through, the Easter eggs and all that. And I'm like, I don't know if I can do it. I can read it till the cows come home, but I just don't know if I can write it. And so hearing you say that, even though you tried to be a little bit more organized with it, you still ended up being, more of a pantser. That's great and encouraging. So you've got another book that you're working on. Have you come up with a title? Like, are you going to keep, since it's a series, you're going to keep the Maple Grove theme?
Yes. So
Okay.
the series name is going to be Maple Grove Mysteries. So that will be the series. So everything will be set in Maple Grove. My husband laughs at me because he's like, are you ever going to write a book that's not in Georgia? That's not in a small town? I'm like, probably not, because that's kind of, that's kind of what I'm trying to build up as my brand. I write small town, whether it's romance or mystery or whatever, like small town, Southern small town books. Because I love that. That's what I love to read. And it's near and dear to my heart. And plus I live it. So it's, it's a lot easier to write what you know. But yeah, so the series is going to be Maple Grove Mysteries. I don't have a title for the next one yet. I'm only maybe three or four chapters into that one. We've had her first big event has happened, and that's about it. So there's also will be a romance in that one as well. So that'll be fun. Because again, I can't not write the romance. But so I'm working on that. And then I've actually got a nonfiction book that I'm working on too. It's a Christian nonfiction. So that will probably come out before the second Maple Grove book, just because it's not as long, and actually nonfictions are not as complicated to write, because again, you're not having to weave storylines and threads and, you know, all the things. It's just very straightforward. So I'm working on both of those now, and hopefully I would love to get the second Murder in Maple Grove released by the end of this year. So if we could do another fall release, because what I did this in October was I kind of tied in the spooky season, you know, released it, murder mystery during the spooky season. So I'd love to do that again if I can get myself in gear to get everything done.
Well, and speaking of the nonfiction, you do so much more. You know, you have this writing with the company that what'd you say, they were in New York? Yeah, so you
It's a
have that
marketing
going on.
agency.
But Paige Skeen, and by the way, she's Emily Paige Skeen, but we call her Paige.
Yes.
So you've heard me call her Paige a few times instead of Emily Paige. But so Paige Skeen does other things still in the writing world. So tell us about that, because you're not going to believe this, but we're hitting our
I know.
mark, and I'm like, how did that happen? How did that
I
happen?
talk a lot.
No, it's good. It's good. So, tell us about, you know, the ministry and the speaking engagements and things that you do.
Okay, so I'm going to try to make this quick. So what I'm in the process of officially starting, which is it's already been started, but I'm in the process of making it an official LLC, but it's Content for Christ Ministries. And so my goal through that ministry is, it's a women's ministry, but it's specifically to provide books, resources, and by books, I mean like fiction, novels, resources, prayer. I have a prayer journal already that I've released, and a little pocket devotional. So basically my goal is to encourage and equip women to live out God's calling on their lives. And that's through, whether that's in their like entertainment choices and their career and their family. So kind of hitting on every area. What I've always desired to do with my writing, specifically my fiction writing, is provide things that if you are a woman of faith, you want to read the romance, you want to read the mysteries, but maybe you don't want all the spice, and maybe you don't want super, you know, gory or bad language. And so I feel like we have lacked in the past for books that are still really good, like that same level of intensity, but without all of that. And so that's kind of my goal. And not to say, like, now there are so many good Christian books that are like amazing, that I would put up against any of the mainstream novels. But so that's kind of the goal of that ministry, is just to provide novels, so books, fiction books, nonfiction books, and resources just for women who are women of faith, who either they're looking for, you know, a way to follow the calling on their life professionally, and specifically if they're into writing. So I've recently released a writing course it's an online course, but it's specifically about how to get into freelance writing, and from a position of blogging for businesses, because that's what, at the agency, that's the work I've been doing since I started freelancing, but is specifically with the agency that I work with. And so the course is all about like how to do that. Like, okay, what does it look like to write a blog post for business? And because it's not just slapping up words on a page, like there's a strategy and there are things that you have to include, and, you know, all of that. And so without getting into the technicalities of that, it's just sort of for the woman who is looking for a way to use her writing to benefit her family financially, but then also because you just really want to write and maybe you want to be home with your kids or whatever. And so that is sort of near and dear to my heart, because if I had known then, when I first started, the things that I teach in the course, I would have probably been a lot farther along a lot sooner. So it's just sort of everything I've learned along the way, and how to do that. So yeah, that's the goal of the ministry. I call it a ministry. It's a business, but it's, you know, the goal is to encourage and inspire women.
So we can get more information on that at your website, which is?
Yep. So it's emilypageskeen.com. And there's a tab for the writing course. There's a tab for books. So everything you need to know. And I have a podcast also, where it's a Christian podcast. So I talk about how, just living life as a Christian woman and, try to be encouraging and whatnot. And that one, I'm not very great about keeping up with it. So it's been a while since I've published an episode, but it is there. There are a few episodes for you to go in and listen to if you're interested in that. And one of my goals for the podcast is eventually I'm going to start also having book reviews. So I'll start like one episode out of the month. I'll start having a review of the books I'm reading. And I'm also on social media. I do a lot of reviews on social media, specifically Instagram, where I'm talking about the books that I'm reading now. Bye, Carlene.
So I guess we need to wrap it up. I have certainly enjoyed this. I like hearing your story. It is a little different, for, sisters in crime, but that's also what I liked about it, was a different way. There's more than one way to skin a cat, and you let us know that here's one way to do it, and to also encourage, people to give it a shot. And
For sure.
also that writing course, that I think that's great. I'm glad we were able to get that in there. So, do we have any questions from the audience before we sign off? Deborah, you're unmuted. Did you have something?
No, I'm just, I was saying I enjoyed the interview.
Oh, well, thank you. And Deborah, I thought about you more than once when Paige was talking, and telling her story. I thought about you. The crying in the shower. I know you weren't in a shower when you found out, Deborah. You were in the line.
I was in a Chick-fil-A line, drive-through.
She found out while she was waiting in line, and when she went to
yeah.
get her food, she's like, oh.
It's a crazy, crazy feeling when a dream is realized. It's like very overwhelming.
Mm-hmm. So I'm glad your dream has been realized. I'm also glad to hear all the things you're still continuing to do. I think that's very inspiring. And before we go, I want to say one thing, because my best friend from Miami is on the page here, Christina Roth. And when Paige was talking about her idea at age 13, when she started writing, Chris, I remembered you and I guess we were in junior high? Seventh grade. And we were going to write a mystery together. And we changed our names and everying.
Oh, how
Jessica
fun.
and Jennifer.
Yeah, I was Jessica LaPrade and she was Jennifer LaPrade.
We'll do it.
It was Wesley. Wait, it was Wesley LaPrade was the boy, right? Remember?
Yeah. We were trying to think of a last name, and he walked up and he was like, "What are you two doing?" And we said, "We need a last name. We're going to be twin writers." And he was like, "LaPrade."
That's a good author name.
Yeah, I think we should do it, Chris.
I think so.
So, thank you everyone for being here. This recording will be posted on the Sisters in Crime YouTube channel with a link from our website, and also Paige will have access to it so that she can share it on her social media. And next month for Sisters for Off the Shelf, we are doing something a little different, which I'm very excited about. In honor of this being our 5th year, we have decided mid-year, good halfway point, that we're going to invite some authors that have been on Off the Shelf in the previous years that have since published something new. And so we've got 4 authors that are signed up for that, and there'll be more information available on Facebook as well as the Sisters in Crime Atlanta website. And Paige, keep that in mind, because as you progress with your Maple Grove mysteries, we may have you back.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I had so much fun, and I could talk forever, so I'm sorry I tend to go on rabbit trails and talk. So I don't make long stories short. I make short stories long.
I thought it was great. I really did. So, okay. So thank you, everyone. Enjoy your Saturday. The Braves are playing at home today. So maybe y'all come out to Truist Park and join me while I'm working. I would love it.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good holiday weekend.
Yeah, you too. Thank
Just
you.
as a reminder, the chapter's Murder in the Book is on June 7th, and that's when readers get together to talk about what they've read and why they liked it. And then on June 14th, instead of a regular chapter meeting, we're having lunch at 6 Feet Under down there across from the cemetery. Optional cemetery walks are available.
Well, that sounds like so much fun.
Well, you can join us. I unfortunately will not be there. We have a game that day. 4:10 start, so no way.
I'm picking up Edie to bring her that day.
Oh, well, that's nice of you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Deborah, for doing that.
All
All
right.
right. Okay. Happy Saturday, Chris. I'll see you in a couple of weeks.
So I'm looking forward to it.
Me too.
Bye-bye.
All right. Okay.
Bye.
Bye.